Hello everyone, back at it again, and this time we're on some ice. It's pretty thin ice, looks to be about 2 inches. There's some cracking going on, and I'm going to show you a couple ways to test the ice to see if it's safe. One way is I've got a 1-inch wood paddle drill bit. It's not really the greatest for ice. Took a little while to get through. It's about 2 inches of ice there. But if you didn't have a spud bar or a chisel or an auger, but you did have a drill and a paddle wood bit or some kind of hole saw, that'll work too. And then you can measure it and see how thick it is. Another way, and this is the way I usually do it, I don't bring a paddle bit normally, is I use my chisel. And I'm just doing a couple soft knocks there. Basically just the weight of the chisel. I'm not even hitting it that hard. And there's just not a lot of ice here. This is early season. This was a few weeks ago. A couple more soft hits and I'm through. Now maybe when I was a little younger, a little bolder, I might have gone out a little bit further, but I'm too old to fish on 2 inches of ice anymore. So this is a few weeks later. You can see I'm at a different pond, and there's been quite a bit of foot traffic. And one of the strategies I use is to follow old tracks, because people have been there, and unless there's a big hole in the ice, it's generally safer. Not completely safe, but safer. And what I'm doing is I'm walking with that chisel, and I'll swing it ahead of where I'm stepping. And if there's a soft spot or starts cracking right away, or I feel that I'm hitting water, I'll ease up. But I can tell right away I'm on much thicker ice. And if you're concerned, just knock a hole in the ice and see how thick it is. And you can measure it with a tape like I did a little earlier, or you can use your hand to gauge, or you can use an ice scoop to gauge how thick it is. There's a wet spot there. I gave that another whack. I'm getting to some ice that has a little water on top of it, and maybe some old frozen slush that refroze. This stuff looks a little different, so I'm just going a little bit slower, taking my time, picking my way along. What I'm really doing is following old tracks, though. The other thing is the ice is kind of slick where it's smooth, and I don't have my my cleats or yak tracks or spikes, and I'm trying to stay on the snowy bits. Some of the ice looked a little wet on top, and I'm just kind of evaluating if I think it's best to go around. You can see my footprints were getting a little wet there. Most of early ice safety is just common sense. I've got floating ice bibs on. I've got ice picks with me. I've got my chisel. And if something seems funny or you're not sure, just make a loop around it like I just did back there. And you could always knock a hole to double check, or if it seems bad, you just turn around and go out another day. But from the looks of things, there's been a lot of people out here, and I'm about where I think I want to fish. Generally, I try to set up in places where there aren't a ton of holes already. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my chisel to chop a hole in the ice. There's about 6 inches of ice, and it doesn't take me too long. I'd call this the Cadillac of production ice chisels. This is the Jiffy Mille chisel, and it's great. It's great. I've seen a couple homemade ones that I think are better. I saw one that somebody made with an old Zamboni blade. Man, that thing could cut. He was a welder, or he knew a welder, and he welded that up together. I don't know where he got the old Zamboni blade, but that thing really did cut. I've seen homemade ones with a wood chisel and a piece of iron bar. But the Jiffy Mille axe is the best one that I've tried. It has kind of a stepped blade to it at the end, and it really kind of chops its way through as it's cutting. It kind of breaks apart the ice as it's cutting it. It works really well. And this is another Jiffy product. This is their ice scoop. It has some kind of coating on the black part of the scoop that resists icing. It doesn't work, you know, when it's really super duper cold, but it works okay. I like the scoop. And so, you know, for new ice that's 6 inches or less, chisel works great. I mean, you don't even really need an auger. You can use it to knock out old holes, and they're pretty inexpensive. But what I typically use is a drill auger combo. That's the lower half of a 6-inch laser hand auger, and I've got a drill adapter between the drill and the bottom half of the hand auger, and it absolutely flies through the ice. So I kind of spread out my holes. I make like a grid pattern. And what I'm doing is just kind of setting up a search pattern for fish. And, you know, some people like to go in a straight line. I usually do some kind of grid. Some people like to go in a circle. It doesn't really matter. But I'm slicing through 6 inches of ice like butter. I mean, it just flies through the ice. Got to be a little bit careful with your wrist, because that drill is a very powerful drill. It's a Milwaukee Fuel M18 drill. They have a new one that supposedly doesn't have that kickback at the end, and it has a safety feature to protect your wrist so you don't get torqued at the end. And if you're not careful, those wrists will just, you know, they'll do a number on your ligaments and wrists. But yeah, it just flies through the ice, and once I'm through, I give it a kick with my boot, and that clears out most of the hole. You can also use reverse on the drill to clear out the holes. And yeah, with 6 inches of ice, it just flies through the ice. It's good to, well, till about the see that disc on the auger adapter. Once that starts bottoming out at the hole, you know, that's pretty much the limit. And then I'll chisel out the rest with my chisel. Last few years, that hasn't been a problem, but in years where there's just a absolute ton of ice, like 3 feet plus of ice, yeah, that can be an issue. But most of the time, that has not been our problem lately. I keep things pretty light with my sled. Mostly I'm just jigging, so I don't have any minnow buckets. I don't have any traps. I have a couple ice rod holders, ice rod cases, and I keep 2 rods in each of them. So 4 rods usually covers me for pretty much anything that what I'm going to do. Like I said, I got my my Jiffy ice scoop there. It's pretty handy. I'm just going through what I take out of my sled. This is actually a slammer. It's sort of like, or a snapper. I think it's called a snapper, sorry. It's sort of like a jaw jacker, but I use it just as a rod holder. I think it's the best rod holder I've ever found. Folds up nice and compact. I got some smelly jelly and a little tackle bag. I got my license in there, a couple tools, some soft plastics, odds and ends. This I think is a foam kneeling pad for gardening, but I use it for ice fishing. I've got my ice picks. You wear those around your neck. If you ever fall through, the ice is really thick and you need some picks to get traction on the ice. I've never actually had to use those, but I keep them with me all the time. I bring some water. I'm not one of those guys that brings a ton of food on the ice. I'm mostly there just to fish. But if you like to bring food, yeah, you can have a nice setup with a grill, sausages, whatever you like. For electronics, I've tried a bunch of them, and what I use mostly now is an underwater camera. And you can get them on Amazon for about $100-150. They work really well, and I think it's more interesting than a flasher or a fish finder or something like that, and they're cheap. This is some paracord. It's kind of a safety thing. This is an underwater camera that I need to try. I haven't fished it yet. I need clearer water. This place is pretty stained. And here's a closer look at my drill setup. I got the Milwaukee M18 drill there. 6 amp hour battery. Here's a look at the drill adapter. I put some electrical tape on that wing nut just to make sure it doesn't fly off. And then I've got an auger guard on that 6-inch auger. And it's super light. And there's my Jiffy Mille chisel. Let me take the safety cover off. You can see the step on it. Every once in a while I take a file to those blades, I guess, and rub it down with WD-40. But it's basically just a big iron pipe with a sharpened end. And yeah, it works great for chopping holes, testing ice. Put that cover on that AquaView thing. I have to figure out how to use that, so you won't see that in this video. And last but not least, I got a fish towel. That's really important for keeping your hands dry. If you have wet hands, they get cold ice fishing, and yeah, you're just not going to last that long if your hands are wet and cold. So I really like having a towel, but you could have a rag or whatever else you need. And the snapper, it folds up into a really compact size or form factor, and it takes up hardly any space, but it's very sturdy, very durable. And I've got these Atlas work gloves. Those are what I use for ice fishing most of the time, unless it's really cold. They're thermal gloves, so there is some warmth to them, but they're thin enough I can still feel. And I buy them, I think it's a 12-pack, and I use them all winter ice fishing, and then I use them in the early spring, and again in the fall, raking leaves, shoveling snow, spreading sand, anything to do with work. But I try to keep a pair that's relatively clean for ice fishing. And for rods, I've got a noodle rod, I've got a spoon rod, I've got a couple big plastic rods. Generally what I do is I start out with bigger stuff, and if the fish don't want to cooperate with the bigger plastics, like 3-inch plastics, 2.5-inch plastics, then I'll go smaller and smaller. And if the fish really give me trouble, I'll use bait. I'll tip my jigs with either worms or grubs. But lately I've been using just red worms because the bait prices keep going up and up and up. In one of the side pockets of the rod cases, I keep a little Plano micro box. And in this little micro box, they're not very expensive. I think $4 or $5, something in that range. And you can fit basically a season's worth of spoons in one of those little micro boxes. I've got all kinds of stuff. Some leech spoons, some Swedish pimples, Castmasters. And I'm just digging around my box looking for something a little smaller to fish. The fish have been a little bit picky today, and I start out with some of those bigger plastics, and they weren't into it. So I had to switch to a little Swedish pimple. This is, I'm going to get the size wrong, but it's a 1/10 ounce Swedish pimple. It's the smallest one they make, I think. And this is in a newer color. Well, it's new to me anyway. It's a black color. I think they might call it like a black neon or black crystal flash. I can't remember what they call it. But one tip for the for the little micro box is to put a rubber band around it, because they can pop open, and it just lives in one of those side pockets there, so it's always with me. But the fish were giving me a little bit of trouble, so I had to switch to smaller spoons and a little tungsten jig. And once I get down to this stage, I'm tipping the spoons and the jig with a little piece of worm, or if you have them, maggots or spikes or mealworms, whatever bait you have handy. When I used to split wood, the bark of some of the wood had little grubs in it. I'd use those too. Fish seem to like them. I don't even know what they were, but any little grub seems to work all right, or worm. I've also used little pieces of dead shiners. You know, you can even like fillet one up and use a piece of the fillet to tip a spoon. Some old timers I used to fish with, they would use perch eyes, and they did really well with perch eyes. They'd jig a bare spoon until they caught a perch, preferably a little perch, and then they'd use the perch eyes to tip the spoon. And what I got here is an underwater camera. Unfortunately, the view for you guys didn't turn out so well. I can see into it, but it just looks like a reflection of my face in the camera on video, so it's not really that interesting, and I have to figure out that other underwater camera to get some better views for you guys, and I will work on that, but I definitely need some clear water. What's really interesting about the underwater camera is that the bottom of a lot of these ponds, it looks like the surface of the moon. You know, it looks like something from outer space. Sometimes there's holes down there. I often see a lot of bubbles in the water. Sometimes you see little bugs and stuff scooting around down there. And the underwater camera, you see all this stuff that you might miss with a fish finder or even forward-facing sonar. Now, it still doesn't help you find the fish, but once you find them, you learn a lot more about them, I think. And the camera is just so easy to carry around. Anyway, a lot of it's personal preference. If you like fish finders or flashers, use those. But if you don't have any electronics at all, I'd really recommend an underwater camera. It really was a game changer for me. You learn so much. You learn what kind of weeds are down there, if they're dead or alive, if they're green or brown. You can see how fish react to your baits. You can see if the fish is, even looking at your bait or is turned around and not looking at your bait. So it's a pretty simple design. It's got a sun shield on it, and it has a little plug you plug in for the audiovisual cable. Maybe it's just a visual cable, not really sure. But you plug that in and turn it on, and you can see whatever the camera lens of it is pointing at. So right now it's looking at the bottom of my sled, which isn't very interesting. But for underwater use, it's really handy. Alright, the fish were giving me a little bit of trouble. I'll show you the jig I had to switch down to. It's a little tiny 1/32 ounce red glow Mongo jig. And this is kind of the last resort. If they don't eat a bare jig tipped with a little grub or piece of worm, yeah, that means it's time for me to move on. Maybe try again another day, or switch ponds, or switch locations. But this usually works for me. And I've got it on a noodle rod from DH Customs. It's a super sensitive, soft noodle rod that can detect super subtle bites. And the fish bite the jig and they don't even realize that there's a rod at the other end of the line. So they hold on to it just a half a second longer. So the combination of the little tiny jig, the little tiny rod, and it being a noodle rod, it gets even the fussiest fish, even the lightest of biters. And yeah, it's just a combo that's kind of my go-to if everything else isn't working. Got kind of a bright sunny day. It's been really cold the past couple days and the fish seem just a little bit slow. So I'm going to give this a couple minutes. The next thing you're going to see is a fish that ate that little red jig. Somehow my camera was off for the hook set, but there he is. That's about a 9-inch bluegill. Not a bad little bluegill. And, you know, fishing the bigger stuff, I could, every once in a while, I'd feel a fish, you know, hit the jig, but they wouldn't eat the hook. They were being real fussy. And just a minute later, I got another fish on, but this isn't a bluegill. That's a crappie. That's, I'm going to measure it in a second, but that was about a 12-inch crappie. So he's not a giant, but I was happy to catch him. And I bet he was bumping some of my other jigs too, and he just wasn't committing really. And then that little red tungsten jig got him right in the roof of his mouth, right in his snout, which is kind of a perfect location for a hook set. I'm trying to position the camera and measure him against my ice scoop there, but he's about 12 inches. Nice thick crappie, and off he goes. I try not to keep him out of the water too long if I'm going to be releasing him. So he wasn't out of the water too long, maybe 10-15 seconds, something like that. And now I'm going to switch locations. There's a little loop on the end of the chisel. You're supposed to put that around your wrist in case it slips out, you don't lose the chisel. But same thing, I'm going to be walking with the chisel ahead of me, and every once in a while I give it a whack before I step there. But all of this ice seems pretty solid to me. All the holes I drilled were pretty uniform, 6 inches, which is plenty for me. I like, you know, 4 inches of good hard ice, but I feel better on 5 or 6. The water in the hole doesn't bounce up and down as you're walking up to it, and if you go over a spot that isn't quite as thick, it's not a problem, whereas, you know, if 4 inches goes to 2, that could be a problem. If 6 inches goes to 4, you know, chances are that's not going to be a problem if it's good ice. Some people get into trouble later in the season. Even though the ice can be plenty thick, it starts to bubble up and loses its structural integrity. And yeah, your chisel will go right through that. So that's another way to test the ice is just the weight of the chisel pushing down. If that goes through the ice, that's not a good sign. Anyway, I'm moving to a different part of the lake that has less foot traffic. So I started out going where other people had been before because I had a reasonable idea it was safe. Now that I've drilled a bunch of holes, well, I thought that was a little maggot, but that was something from a tree. Anyway, now that I've drilled a bunch of holes, I'm pretty confident about the ice conditions. I'm moving to a different part of the pond and seeing if I could get on, I don't know, some fish that haven't been really fished yet this season. Alright, I got to where I wanted to fish. And I'm going to get that drill auger out. Start drilling some holes. And as before, it absolutely flies through the ice. It's about 6 inches of ice here too. That drill auger really changed the game for me for jigging. and it's nothing for me to pop, 20, 25 holes a day. And with about 6 inches of ice, that 6 amp hour battery will last, I don't know, probably a couple trips. See that kick out at the end? That's the drill getting caught on the bottom part of the ice. For whatever reason, sometimes it's hard to break through that last 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch of ice. I don't know, it seems almost like a friction thing. But the drill can get caught up there and kick your wrist out. And as long as you're prepared for it, it's not a big deal. If you're not prepared for it, you can really torque your wrist. So yeah, probably when I wear out this drill, I'll upgrade it to the one with the safety feature now, where it doesn't do that little kick out at the end. But this works fine for me, for now anyway. And what I'm doing here is I'm drilling kind of in a line, and then I go back, when I'm coming back to the sled, I go about 20 yards in one direction and then stagger my holes on the way back. It's just a little bit more efficient. I know you can't see into the camera like I can, but this is mainly how I fish now. I have the underwater camera in one hand and my fishing rod in the other. It's a little cumbersome, but you get used to it. On a really hot bite, I don't need the camera. I can just fish blind. You can see I just missed one there. I wish you could see into the camera. I'll work on getting some underwater views. But a fish came up and ate my jig. I could see him on camera while I was jigging that. And yeah, I'm trying to get him to go again. And they were real fussy on this day. It's like, sometimes you get them to come back and eat like I did here. And other times, it was basically like one swing and a miss. And if you didn't get them on the first try, that was it. And they were gone. He got a little snow on him, so I washed him off. He's not quite as big as that other one. I didn't measure him, but somewhere under 12 inches, maybe 10. And I got him on that little black Swedish pimple. I thought maybe a subtle color would work pretty well, because the fish were, they're kind of in a funk. And black is a pretty subtle, non-intrusive color. Anyway, it seemed to work for that crappie. I wouldn't have really thought of using a black Swedish pimple, but I saw it online somewhere, and I thought, you know what, I'll give it a try. And it works pretty well, especially if the fish aren't too fired up. Here we go. Working on another fish. Sometimes that camera line gets in the way, but it's all right. Got to work on my camera angle. What I really need is a cameraman, a camera woman, camera person. There he is. Not bad. Again, not quite as big as the first one, but it's okay. They're all fun. He's hooked right in the snout. It's taken me a second to get him off. I really need my my Swiss Army knife with the hook disgorger built in. That would save a little trouble here. But I will get him eventually, or get him free eventually. There he goes. See ya. Alright, I had a good time today, but now it's time to go. Got to loosen up those drags and put away those rods. Thank you all for watching. I'll catch you on the next one. See ya.